So the first time I ever saw Exeter City was in 1967, league game at Griffin Park. So Brentford were my local team, and it was an evening match, and I'll always remember it because Brentford won 3-1 and the Brentford striker scored a hat-trick. But I don't remember a thing about those goals. The goal I remember was a stunning long-range left-foot volley by George Lay, which, it's one of those away goals that the home crowd clapped because it was so stunning. And I remember it, I was a little boy, the lights were on, and the red and white stripes of Exeter. I remember it very, very vividly. So that's the first Exeter City game I ever went to and goal I ever saw. I also remember Brentford playing Exeter a few years later, and Brentford needed to win promotion. And it was a very nervy game, and Brentford won 1-0 with a penalty. But I always remember we kind of ran on the pitch at the end, and I remember all the Exeter City players watching the scenes and almost thinking, we'd like a bit of that. I always remember that. So everyone else was celebrating, and the Exeter players were just looking and watching on. Anyway, the years went by. I applied to go to university. One of my ground rules was that I'd only apply to universities that had a Football League team. Exeter were one of those, and I got given a place at Exeter to read history and archaeology, and came down here in 1973, and obviously wanted to watch the local team play. I didn't go for the first few months in the first term, but I went in kind of spring 1974. And I remember walking from the campus towards the ground, and I couldn't work out where the ground was because I was used to grounds with massive, great floodlight pylons. And I thought it'd be easy to find. And I remember getting lost in the side streets coming down from Union Road thinking, where is the ground? So I was a little bit late. But I made my way into the ground, made my way onto the big bank, and literally the game had started, and literally as I walked in there, Fred Binney bore down on goal and scored. So Exeter were playing Stockport County, and I thought, this is all right, the goal immediately. Exeter won the game 2-1, and really that hooked me immediately. I just loved everything about the feel of the ground, the fact that I could just stroll down there from the campus. So I started watching City more and more. Of course, the 76-77 season, City were promoted, and I watched an awful lot of the games. I can remember being in Exeter the night we played away at Barnsley, and I was in a local pub with some friends, and we actually, in those days, there was just no way of finding out what the scores were. There was no internet, there was no mobile phones, so we actually rang from a payphone in the pub, the Express and Echo, at half time, and said, "What's the score?" And they said, "You're losing 3-0, I'm afraid." Barnsley were 3 up, and we just thought, kind of our hearts sank. And then we rang at the end, and they said, "You're not going to believe this, but Exeter have won 4-3. So I can remember celebrating in the pub. The big step towards promotion that season. When I left university, I as things turned out, I stayed in Exeter, brought my family up here, got married. So Exeter became my home, and I started watching Exeter more and more. Lots of occasions that I can really remember, like the Great Cup run, of course. Everyone probably talks about that, 1980-81, those amazing nights. And I stood on the big bank, home to Leicester City and then Newcastle United. Unbelievable to be in a crowd of about 18,000 at St James's Park, and then to stuff a good side, and it was it was really happy days. Then we drew Tottenham, of course, away. I'm a big Spurs fan as well, so that was a perfect match. I remember I was at work, and my wife Anne had to queue up for me to get tickets, and the queues were enormous. So that showed a lot of love, I think, that she was willing to do that, and went up on the train, went up on a football special to Tottenham, and of course Exeter played really, really well at Tottenham, but lost 2-0. But they really did play well, and there's about 7,000 Exeter fans there. So by then I was really hooked and felt part of it, and regularly watched City in the following decades. I mean, one of the things I always like about my time watching City is that I've watched from all sides of the ground, so I feel in a way I've watched from 6 different sides. I started on the Big Bank and often watched on the Big Bank, and over the years have watched particular games on the Big Bank. I watched the Manchester United replay in 2005. I was on the Big Bank for that, for example. But I had quite a few friends that in those days used to stand on the St James's Road end. That wasn't an away end in the 70s and 80s. And so I used to watch a lot of games from the St James's Road end. And it was a good end to watch from, because it was quite a small end as it is now, but you were right on the pitch, and not so many people used to watch from there, so you'd get really close up. One that particularly stands out to me is when we played Liverpool in the League Cup in I guess it was the late 70s, early 80s, and Ian Rush was really early in his career playing one of his first games from Liverpool, and he was just lethal. And I remember being really close up to him, and thinking he's got something, and he certainly went on to have a glittering career. So I certainly remember him from behind St James's Park. I then used to go with a friend who was quite elderly, and I remember him saying, "I don't think I can stand anymore. I'm going to have to get a seat in the old grandstand." And I said, "Oh, I'll come and sit with you there." So for several seasons, watched from the old grandstand, which was a different experience sitting, and it was the only place you could sit, of course, then. And I can remember I did like being close to the managers, and I remember taking my sister to see a game. I think it was against Fulham, and Alan Ball was the manager then, and him muttering all the way down the touchline at half time about a bad decision, and was absolutely furious, and was speaking to the crowd as he went along, saying, "That was never a goal. That was never a goal." So again, nice interaction if you sit, where the club officials are. So I remember that. I then spent many years watching from the cowshed, which I loved. I loved that raised look, and of course the atmosphere in there. It was a pretty decrepit structure, and the toilets, particularly, I remember at the St James's Road end of the cowshed, were just primitive, prehistoric, really. Just a wall, basically, and not much else. But it was a great atmosphere in there, and I remember watching loads of exciting games there from the cowshed. And then, of course, watching from the modern Big Bank. And then my season ticket now is in the modern main stand. So I feel I've watched from all the sides I could have done here. I got more and more involved in the club as years went by. I contributed quite a lot to the programme for several years, particularly the conference years. I used to take pictures of the away fans. So there was always a spread in the programme of pictures, and people used to like having their pictures taken. Well, on the whole, they did. I remember once at Wickham, somebody running a mile. They obviously weren't supposed to be there. So I always remember that. So got more and more involved. Wrote quite a few historical articles for the programme as well. And then kind of more recently became a trust member, and more actively involved in a number of things, involved with the One Game One community group that campaigns for equality and diversity around the club. I was co-opted onto the trust board through that role. I then stood for election, got elected, and more recently became chair in October 2016 of the Supporters Trust. So heavily involved with that, became club director. So so it's a real journey from first watching Exeter City when I didn't even support Exeter, but remembering that red and white and remembering a brilliant goal from George Lay, to now being heavily involved in the club. And it's been a brilliant journey. It's given me so much pleasure, so much joy.